Hi folks, how you going today? Today we're doing a full-size watercolour. It should be a lot of fun and we'll be putting into practice everything that we've been doing in the last 4 or 5 workshops. So hope you've been watching how to prepare my watercolour paints, how to stretch paper and done all the little exercises that we've been doing, and then you should enjoy this one. So thank you very much for watching. Well, today should be a really good workshop. So I prepared all my paints. Takes about 2 hours when I'm doing a demonstration to get my paints ready. So sometimes there'd be a lot more mixes than this. In this particular palette here, I have got dried up paint, Payne's Grey. So I used that a couple of weeks ago, and now I can just add a little bit of water to it to rejuvenate it. So there's not really any wastage with watercolour paint. At the end of each session, I just let the water evaporate for a few days, and then when I'm ready to do another watercolour painting, I just fill the paint back up to the line and add more paint if I need to. So if you look at my episode 8, there I go into great detail about how to mix watercolour paints. I know it sounds simple, but it's not that easy. So here today I'm working on a sheet of 165 GSM watercolour paper. I've got 2 soft 1-inch watercolour brushes and a number 10 round pointed watercolour brush. I've also stretched my paper. In episode 4, I explain how to stretch paper. So I'm going to start off by doing the sky area. So I'm going to be liberally applying water along the horizon. Plenty of water, we really can't put in too much at this stage. Now I'm coming in with a little bit of yellow ochre paint. Now as I continue doing this skyline, I want the paint to run away from me. So I'm going to lift up the bottom edge of the painting. And see how it's flowing uphill now? So lifting up the board a little bit more. Now I'm coming in with permanent rose. So there isn't any actual white in watercolour paint. So if you want any white, you need to leave the area, as in not paint it on, and that becomes your white. Today we're doing what we call traditional watercolour painting. And although there's a product on the market called masking fluid, I don't really recognise that in traditional water painting myself personally, because when we think about traditional in the olden days, they didn't have masking fluid. They could use wax sometimes, but you couldn't actually paint over that afterwards because you were leaving wax on the paper. So now I'm laying my board down so that the washes can just settle. Now I'm coming in with a bit of the hill line. So this painting is going to be of a farm with a whole herd of cattle walking towards you. You probably saw that in the beginning. So now I'm just adding in a little bit of burnt sienna paint. With watercolour, you've got to work really quickly if you want to do wet in wet. Had I let that sky dry and I tried to put this burnt sienna on, it would have just been hard lines and it wouldn't have looked anything like this. So that's why it's so important to get all your paints prepared before you start. I'm coming in now with some phthalo blue. And some little bit of a lemon yellow. And splattering the paint on here and there. I'm using a very soft brush now. A little bit of yellow ochre. Coming in with a little bit of burnt sienna. Tissues are invaluable. You can take out, if you put too much paint or you want to add a bit of light into a certain area, you can dab either a dry tissue, or if you wet the corner of a tissue and dab it in the paint, you take off a lot more paint. So it really just depends, trial and error. Hopefully you've watched my episodes in pen and ink. There's episodes 4, 5, 6 and 7. And we do lots of basic wash techniques using pen and ink, and you learn so much in that about tonal value, and that will really help you when you come to do your watercolour painting. The whole of this painting only took me an hour and a half. The filmmakers sped it up for me, which is great. So to do a full-size painting in an hour and a half is very quick. But as I say, you need to in watercolour, otherwise it just doesn't work. Remembering the only white is the paper. So I've roughly drawn in where the cattle are, and they're the white bits in the middle. So they'll be the highlight on the cattle. Just coming in now with a bit of phthalo blue and naturally mixed with the yellow ochre, or the yellow is making a green colour, which is good. Just coming with a bit of raw umber now, a little bit of Payne's grey. So this is an area which we just done a couple of minutes ago and it's all wet. So I'm just getting some lemon yellow now and just flicking it in. See how it's making that lovely effect? If it did dry, if you know, say that painting was 2 days old, you could actually go over it with a wash of just water and then flick the yellow paint in. It wouldn't quite work the same, not quite, but it would be pretty much very similar. It's coming in with a bit of permanent rose. Just getting a suggestion of water happening here. There's going to be like a little dam, if you like, in the foreground. Watercolour is, I'd say it's one of the most difficult medias to work with. And in the season, when the seasons change, like between hot and cold weather, the whole technique changes. Like in the summer, it can all dry sort of within half an hour and very quickly, and can make things difficult for you. In the winter, it can take hours to dry, and sometimes this can be a pain too. So in my workshops and technique courses, I work in all media. I work in oils, acrylics, pastel. I do courses on drawing and colour theory, which is interesting if you're just starting to paint. I suppose we just paint to, well, I paint to just satisfy my soul, I suppose, and the use of colour in a work, you know, is a very big part of whether the work makes you happy, if you like. So the colour theory, if you're just starting, will get you on the road to putting down groups of colours that work well together, rather than the sky just being blue and the trees green and the grass green. It sort of can be boring, whereas once you've done the colour theory, you introduce a lot of other colours into the work. I painted from life over 100 railway stations around Queensland and New South Wales. And about 75% of those were done in watercolour, actually sitting on the platform with all the trains going by and the people and everything. And that was between 1992 and 1998. A number of the stations were done in oils, pastel and acrylic as well. In the earlier watercolour workshops, which I hope you've seen, we do very simplistic ideas, a simple horse and a cow and a few little egg shapes, and very basic. I used to have an art school called Artists Out and About Australia. When I taught somebody watercolour, I used to say it'll be 6 months before you actually start to do a proper, if you like, proper painting with all the different techniques to learn. So lots of practice. So here now I've let the paper dry for a couple of hours. That's supposed to be a man on a horse, and he's going to be herding the cattle in a certain direction. We're just putting a little bit of a start of a cow in there. Using a number 1 watercolour brush, like what we call Taclon. It's like a synthetic brush. I'm coming in now with a little bit of ultramarine. A lot of people think that shadows are just grey or black or whatever, but ultramarine works really well in shadows. There are all different weights of paper to work on. This is 165 GSM. Then you have 300 GSM. Most of my watercolours are done on 620 GSM. That way the paint, per 1, doesn't need stretching, and 2, it doesn't buckle when you paint on it. You can either work on hot pressed watercolour paper or cold pressed or rough. Hot pressed watercolour paper is completely flat, a bit like your photocopying paper. It's got no tooth on it at all. It's a lot heavier and thicker than photocopying paper, but it's completely flat like that. Cold pressed watercolour paper has got like little deckled bits throughout it, so it's working on an uneven surface. And then rough watercolour paper, it's a lot more coarse and a lot more grainy. So every artist has their favourite. If you're just starting, then hot pressed is the most difficult paper to work on because the paint just flows everywhere. Whereas when you work on cold pressed, because of the little hollows in the paper, it holds the paint just there in a certain spot, which works well. Please remember to tune in and also watch my drawing techniques too. They're of interest if you're just starting to draw. Coming in with some Payne's Grey and now some ultramarine. Watercolour dries about 3 or 4 shades lighter than what you put it down. So it's an art form knowing how much of the paint to remove when you put it down and trying to work out how light it will be when it dries. Shortly I'm going to be turning the right hand side just to the right of those cattle. I'm going to be turning that into a river coming towards us, and I'll be showing you how to do that with a little dam in the foreground. Quite often when you're just starting to watercolour, or any medium really, you can overwork a painting and sort of maybe spoil it. So sometimes nowadays it's good, you know, I mean, you've got the cameras nowadays or your phones where you can maybe photograph the painting in all the different steps through, particularly with watercolour. And so if you do wreck the painting towards the end of it, you can look back at the photo and think, I should have stopped there, and you'll learn from that, you know. Just coming in with a bit of cadmium red there. Bit of Payne's grey. Painting's all about balance. I do workshops on composition, which are good for not only artists but also photographers. What makes your eye lead into the painting. Just a bit of cadmium red here and there. Our soil here where I live in southeast Queensland is very red. Now here I'm working with a blade, like a little knife thing with those little blades that break off, you know. So as I say, there's no white in watercolour, so I'm trying to put some highlights here on the river. So by dragging the blade to and fro, I'm scratching off the top layer of the paint, if you like, to reveal the white. You can not only use this method for obviously doing water, but you can also use it vertically on trees and things like that. If you want to put a highlight on the side of a tree, mustn't do this unless the paper is completely dry. Obviously, the darker the paint, the more contrast there is when you scratch off the paint, the more effective it is. Another way to take off excess paint is to get a stiff brush, like an old oil painting brush, and dip it in water and then rub away at the watercolour where you don't want it, wiping your brush on a tissue as you go. So here I'm scraping in a few vertical lines and putting a few highlights on the cows where I've put too much black. See how it's created a shiny effect, giving the illusion of water. Now I'm balancing the picture. People often say to me, oh, what's this and what's that? Well, it's just my painting, you know. It's like maybe they're a suggestion of a tree, maybe it's a little bit abstract in the work. Thing is, with watercolour, you can't take it off if you don't like it. So had I not liked those strokes in the bottom right-hand corner, which I'm doing now, having done them in phthalo blue, there would be no way of getting them off. So you could dab them off and get a little bit off, but you would be still stuck with it. So that's why I'm saying it's an advanced technique. Whereas when we work in oils, we can just get a cloth with some terps and take off a whole area we're not happy with. And when we're working in acrylics, we can just paint over a whole thing and just put anything in, you know. But with watercolour, that can't be done. If I wanted to put a cattle now walking through that water, on the bottom right hand, across the back on the right hand side, that would be impossible to do because I have used up all the paper and you could not scratch away an area big enough to put a cow in. So careful planning needs to be thought of before you start the picture, and in particular where your light's coming from. Just coming in with a little phthalo blue now, adding a bit more to those shadows. It's getting to the stage now where I slow things down and a lot of thought goes into it, whereas previously it was just throwing it all on, but now this is a stage where you can so easily wreck a picture. It's been a lot of fun anyway. That's my little trademark popped up into the corner there. The Jen Agatha dog. I've written the Jen Agatha series books. 3 books, each has got 60 paintings in. I hope you've enjoyed watching this YouTube video, and don't forget to subscribe at the end and press the little bell thing, and then every time a new film comes up you'll be notified. Yeah, well, it's been a lot of fun, and just putting in the last few strokes here. Well, it'd be quite nice to walk through a farm like that, wouldn't it? Thank you for watching.
Hi guys, it's Midge here. Hope you enjoyed that video. Make sure you like and subscribe for all future uploads, and our contact details are in the link in the description below.